day. In fact, just a minute ago, my screen went blank. So hopefully it'll hang on while I'm on and sharing a few words to begin. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your afternoon with us. When I first came to the system office over 2 years ago, we were in the middle of writing procedures and code for credit for prior learning, and that seems like a lifetime ago. It also seems like a lot of work that has gone on in between time, in the midst of those 2 years and in the midst of a pandemic. So very happy to be at this point where we are at the point of really getting down to sort of the nitty-gritty work of bringing credit for prior learning to reality. And so I think as we think about our students, as we think about all that they've been through over the past couple of years, we want to make sure that they get all the credit that they're due. We want to make sure that our students have the opportunity to complete and have the credentials that they need to go out into the workforce and obtain jobs. So this is really important work. It takes a lot of behind the scenes expertise and time and effort to get to the point where we can really document the learning that our students are coming to us with and help them along their educational pathway by using that credit. So very excited to get to this work and just so appreciate your time, your energy, and your expertise as we think about how to particularly provide credit for those industry credentials and experiences that our students are bringing to our colleges. So want to give a shout out to Dr. Matt Meyer and Dina Guido for all their work on behalf of this project. There has been a lot of meetings that have gone on where they are working through the procedures for credit for prior learning. They worked on our code, state board code, to put that into policy. And so a lot of work that they have done behind the scenes to make this a reality. So just really appreciate their work and their efforts, and those efforts will continue. So this is not the end of a journey. It's certainly maybe it's not the beginning, but it's or the end. We're somewhere in the middle. Also want to give a shout out to Eric Fotheringham and our collaborations with the UNC system and all the work that we've done in collaboration to really work on this project to make sure that all of our students are getting the credit that they deserve. So with that, I don't want to stand in the way of the real work that's going to go on today, but did want to say thank you for your time, thank you for your expertise, and I just look forward to the conversations.
Thank you, Dr. Gold. We did send out an agenda, although everybody got our draft agenda, but it was close, so no worries there. Next on our agenda, though, and that was a great segue, Dr. Gold, mentioning Eric Fotheringham from the UNC System Office, and I know I saw Eric jump on. Eric, there?
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
All right. I love going back and forth between Zoom and Teams. 18 months in, you think my laptop will be able to figure this out?
It's a struggle we all have. Thank you for making the effort.
Oh, I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Well, the floor is yours, Eric. And I knew we threw this to you last minute, but if you wouldn't mind just touching on some of the work that we've been doing together and the plans for the UNC System Office as we move forward. Does that sound good?
That sounds good. And if I miss anything, let me know. But we really have been working for quite a while, and on, to be completely transparent, to try and copy what you all are doing around credit for prior learning. You're leading out on this, and we know that this is a huge priority for you, but we know also for the future of higher education with the changing demographics, with just a different focus and a different type of student that is coming. Credit for prior learning is not only a selling point, but is really a way to help validate the learning that can happen outside of the classroom, that does happen outside of the classroom, and that research has shown to support retention, success. It is not a way to lose money on the front end. It's giving away credits. It really is a way to attract high quality students, and a lot of the students that are really a priority for both, we know, for you all and for us as well. And so I would say that what we're trying to do is we're approaching this in a variety of ways. And I think and again, doing this in a very similar way that we have observed from you. One is to think about things on a system level, and then think about things on an individual institution level. And what makes sense in terms of either setting policies or setting parameters, or allowing for the appropriate amount of space for our institutions to do what works best for them. And so one of the leading pushes for a policy that we're exploring, and whatever that might look like, is certainly to have a response to community college transfer students who are coming with some credit for prior learning on their transcript. And so what does that look like? How does that fit into any one of the hundreds and thousands of articulation agreements that are out there? Both discipline, institution, legislatively mandated, all of that. And so how does that fit into larger partnerships, larger transfer initiatives, but then also just some of those agreements that we have, right? If it's being awarded at the community colleges, what are our responsibilities as good partners, and certainly as recipients of the students that you've prepared? And so I think the ultimate goal, if you'll excuse kind of this terminology, but this is the way I've been thinking about things lately, is what are the outcomes that we want? What's the brand that we are thinking about in terms of credit for prior learning at the university system? So is it just for the credit for prior learning that most everybody already agrees on, right? AP, those types of, the test scores, the language scores, all those sorts of things that acknowledges prior learning and awards academic credit. When we get to that point, we're usually good with getting everybody on board. And we say, well, we have an AP policy. We're moving, we're constantly working on improving efforts around the military. That is prior learning, and how do you award credit? And so we kind of break it down like that. And we're pretty much 50% of the way to having a full policy on credit for prior learning. And so what are those next steps? And it certainly is going to begin with working closely with you all and making sure that we have a policy that aligns with the work you're doing. And then what are those extra steps that make sense for each institution and the system as a whole? Outside of having that sort of branding, or really clear definition of what it is that we're focusing on, how do we help the institutions increase their capacity? And we've done that in a variety of ways so far, of aligning with some national experts, participating on different efforts. We work closely with you all on a variety of efforts around folks on adult and working learners. And so how can there are some institutions that want to start with creating a portfolio course, credit for prior learning, which for me is kind of the last step, because that seems to be the hardest. So I would save that to the end. But it's, do you want to start there? Do you want to start with just trying to set up some policy that makes sense for what you currently offer? And so each institution is kind of at a different place. And so how can we support institutional capacity? And then the third kind of leg of this prior learning stool, or it's a weird analogy, but the number 3 on my list is how does this fit into existing projects, right? So what does credit for prior learning look like in military student work? What does credit for prior learning look like in the transfer world? What does it look like in adult and working learners? And finding those commonalities among our institutions, and again within the system office, and align with your work. So I think what we're really trying to do is think of how we want to define credit for prior learning, right? What that looks like as a policy, whether it's a broad scope, and just starting with what transfer students might bring, or something much broader. How do we help our institutions increase their capacity? and then what does it look like as it fits in with a lot of the existing work that already is happening. And so those are what we're doing, and I'm trying to layer that and scaffold that on to a lot of the the current projects that are already happening. You all know about the common numbering system that President Hans has put forward. What does prior learning look like with that? What does it look like with military? What does it look like with transfer work? And so we're trying to build on top of what already exists. So Matt, does that help? Is there anything you'd like me to dig into a little bit deeper?
No, but yeah, you're going to be able to stick around, right?
I will until probably about 3:30.
Okay, so
okay.
We're going to run through some of this. We're going to actually take a look at our panels here in a second, and so everybody knows who's working on what, with what, and with who, and all that kind of good stuff. But I think there could be some questions as we get through some of this content, and would love for you to be able to hang around if you can.
Yep.
Awesome. And with that, Dina, if you wouldn't mind, okay, she's got it up. So this process, many of you actually participated with us back in, I don't know, I think it was 2019, maybe 2018, when we did a lot of the initial work. And we're going to talk about some of the other stuff that's going to happen. But we had some panels, and our process was to reach back out to those who helped us when we were in Winston-Salem and see if they, if you were still around and hadn't retired or moved on to something else. And we had a lot of folks say, yeah, definitely want to be a part of it. And then the coordinators here in the system office also reached out to some of their go-to people, and we've got the panels for the most part. And so what you can see right here, we have a professional development panel that Dina and I are going to lead. And you can see the individuals there. And first of all, we got Sonia from the system office. Sonia has been the person who's helped us with the coding. So what the registrars will code onto the transcripts and coming up with different designations for each of the different types of prior learning. Couldn't have done it without her. I'm so happy that she's going to continue and be a part of this. It's just awesome. And then I'm not going to read off everybody's name, but thank you so much to those who are on these panels. We can't do it without you. And we need your free help. We can't pay you anymore, but we really appreciate you helping out. So, Dina, you want to flip? So we also have it's got biotechnology, and I see some of the folks on, Christy and Emily and some others. This is going to look at some of the life science related industry certifications. And you can see I got Rob on there. Rob may or may not be on there. He's may have some of his people. But anyway, go to the next panel. Okay, military. So Susan has left the farm. As many of you know, Susan Barbetta, she retired, and there was a lot of work done. The UNC system office was involved in that. Well, one of the things that we want to do here in the community college system office is go back to that information, go back to what was created, and validate is probably not the right word, but we want to make sure everything is still good, that there's no changes, that it's up to date. And then we're going to be looking at how we're going to really handle this content, this material, to get it out there into the systems. That right now it's a searchable PDF, I believe. That's old school. That's like top of the technology tree back in the 1990s. So we need to do something better. We're going to be working on that. We're going to bring this crew together, and we'll keep moving forward. Next panel. Frank, you want to talk about your folks?
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is a great panel we have, and appreciate everything you guys are doing to assist. I wish we could go back and listen to Kale and Ace and some of the presentations and the background research that went into this, so that the significance behind that, and really just to follow up what's already been said about how it really does promote student success and completion. And so we've got a great group here. I really look forward to working with you. Here, I'll let you actually look to see what it looked like without a mask, and I don't know whether I look better or not. Leslie, be quiet, please. Don't say a word. So I look forward to working with everyone, and I'll send you out something following this this meeting. So we're going to be right on top of things, and hope we can get this completed. We've been talking about this since I've been here 15 years ago, so I'm looking forward to really closing it up. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Jaime?
Yes, good afternoon. Again, we have a very strong team of subject matter experts. I'm looking forward to working with the team on developing some a crosswalk between industry certifications to credit courses, and I'll be serving on the IT team and the business team. So we have many colleges represented here, and again, looking forward to working with the team.
Excellent. Tracy or Tanya?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Welcome to the public safety team. We do have a team at the system office of Tanya Clark, our EMS specialist, and Kenny Weatherington, our fire and rescue and emergency management specialist. And I'm going to be working with CJ. What we're planning to do with the folks on the public safety panel is to break you up into 3 subgroups. I'm going to send you an email and ask if you would self-select to a primary group. You can, of course, participate in all the subgroups. We're going to have one EMS group, one CJ group, one fire group to really get into the weeds of it and then come back with all the recommendations together. We also will be overlapping some with the allied health because in 2018-19, we did not have this public safety team exactly the same way we do now. And some of these classes and some of the certifications were vetted by that group. We're going to pick up where that work left off, and then we'll circle back with them to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Thank you, Tracy. Lori?
We have a variety of people here on the healthcare committee that some were with us last time and others are brand new. Lots of different disciplines that I can't tell you who is from which one because I don't remember. The only thing I regret is that we can't get around those nice round tables and actually do this. That was such a great thing. I learned so much from all the people on our team the last time. Again, we'll be sending out more after this, and I just appreciate the opportunity of working with these folks again.
Thank you, Lori. Coming soon, I don't know if Mary or Michelle are on and can speak to that, but if not, are either there? Mary? Okay.
They're at a conference, I think, in Caraway, maybe.
Okay.
Today,
No
speaking to a bunch of people. So.
No worries, but they will be putting together a panel to address a few hospitality certifications that we have. The next panel is there. Oh, no, we already took care of Dr. Gold. All right, so one of the things that we want to do on the agenda real quick, and Dina, I don't know if I'm skipping around, but I did have Nate next on our list to talk. And one of the things that, and this might be the framing for it, one of the things, if you recall, those of you who were with us last time, we looked at those industries, and I got to thank Frank. Frank really helped us the last time identify all those industry recognized certifications that we really looked at. And what we're doing now is we're taking some of those industry certifications and looking at the credit that we identified then and are going to, again, validate that those are still good, debate, argue, come up with something if they're not. But also included in the new work are the industry certifications that have been, I don't want to say approved, but are on the NC Workforce Credentials list. Okay, so before we begin to talk about all these different things that are on your screen, the types of credit for prior learning, I think, Nate, if you're out there, talk a little bit about what you've been doing since you came back from your sabbatical in the state of Washington, around the NC workforce credentials and where we are.
Nate, are you unmuted?
Thanks, Tracy. So here I was talking away. I was just saying, thank you, everyone. Glad to be with you all, and excited to be diving back into some credit for prior learning work. It feels a bit like Back to the Future and kind of diving right back into some of the old things, but thrilled to be here and excited to provide just a little update around NC workforce credentials, which is something that North Carolina has been engaged in for almost 2 years now. We're coming up on our 2-year anniversary of the work group being down in the trenches on this work. And so we can go ahead and go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what this is and kind of how it relates to the credit for prior learning work. I think we have another slide, maybe. I don't know. Okay. If not, oh, good. So just wanted to, great, there we go. So at our state board back in February actually updated their strategic plan to include a tactic underneath our economic and workforce impact goal, specifically tied to the NC workforce credentials. And so we provided an update to them. And so the next couple of slides that you're going to see is really that information and that framing. The board was really interested in identifying some ways that we can contribute to the state's economic recovery after the pandemic. So we are still going to keep hope alive, and we're going to keep talking about it like we're going to get to the other side of this thing, right? And so this particular tactic is one that I think it really touches on a lot of different aspects of what we do every day at the colleges. So why were we looking to create this group or be focused on this? So on the next slide, what you're going to see is kind of the why behind this. And so specifically, you've probably heard this 1,000 times, but North Carolina's post-secondary education attainment goal, the 2 million by 2030, which we actually think is probably a little low now, given some of the recent economic announcements across the state. But basically, if we did nothing different, we would have a shortfall of roughly 300,000 credentials. And when we looked at where the gaps were in the market, most of those credentials that would fill that gap are in the post-secondary space, but they are below the degree level. And so we wanted to make sure that if we were going to be focused on those, that we had a good operating definition about what we mean by good quality and how do we make sure that we're directing our efforts in a way that are going to make sure our students are getting a credential that will have a real return for them in the labor market. So what you see on the screen here, that high quality non-degree credentials valued by North Carolina employers that support our citizens in obtaining an in-demand living wage job. And that's kind of been our North Star when looking at those industry certifications. So again, supporting that statewide attainment goal, elevating and addressing equity issues, and ultimately focusing our normal focus on developing a robust talent pipeline. So kind of how do we go about doing this? Well, we were one of 6 states. I think I mentioned that. So it was us, Washington, Ohio, Florida, Massachusetts, and I always forget one, and North Carolina, right? So the identify high value credentials, what do we mean by that? So we started actually by looking at the labor market data and finding out what are the jobs that are actually in demand in North Carolina. Sorting on that, then looking just at that non-degree level, and then from there looking to see, well, even among those jobs and those credentials, what is it that's actually going to get a North Carolinian to a family-sustaining job that'll keep the roof over the head and the food on the table, right? So that essentially generated a preliminary list of what those credentials were. We were able to hold a series of about 10 focus groups with different industry sectors looking at the credentials that related to them and getting their input on that. Took that back, noodled on that a bit, broke down that analysis, and then ultimately refined the list and sent it out for a pulse survey to collect kind of an up-down vote on each credential and whether or not they actually had hiring preferences to that credential that was there. So we are crazily close to having that list ready to launch it out, and it'll have a lot of immediate uses, certainly helping students make use of that list and determining what has value in North Carolina's economy. There's two different stats that are kind of flying around out there. There's something like somewhere between 900 and 600,000 credentials out in the universe. And how does a person ever make any sense of all of that? And the list that we're looking at is somewhere in that ballpark of 150 to 175 credentials in North Carolina. So moving beyond that, a work group was formed from the partners that you see here on the screen that basically was looking to set policy about how do we incentivize students to pursue those kinds of credentials, but also how do we incentivize our education and training system to be able to deliver those. And so that provides opportunities for us to dive into things like student supports, so things like our recent GEAR scholarship program, but also looking particularly on our short-term workforce side of the house, how do we incentivize colleges to offer these programs through things like performance measures and getting them credit for having done this work, right? And then, of course, maintaining that process and having that transparent, how does a credential get on the list and how does it fall off, and then keeping that list alive. So an annual process to keep it up to date. So in North Carolina, we were able to take that and we have categorized each of our credentials. And so on our next slide, you'll see kind of the 4 buckets, right? So we know that there are some credentials that, you know, are really important and you're going to have that to perform that role. That could be like a first aid or a notary type credential, but that's not going to get you the job, right? We know that there are essential credentials that are going to start you on a pathway to a family sustaining job, but it's maybe not going to quite get you there in that wage bucket. And we know that there are ones that are going to get you there on a standalone basis. So they on their own merit will get you directly into a wage to keep that roof and that food going, right? And there are some other credentials that kind of bolt on, if you will, once you're already in an industry. But for the NC workforce credentials, that is really just looking at the 2 middle columns that you see here on the screen. And so that kind of provides the framework for how we're able to categorize each credential in North Carolina's labor market. On the next slide, I talked about how we were using a wage threshold to make sure that we were being cognizant of, you know, if we're going to direct our limited public resources, making sure that we're getting folks into those good paying jobs. And so using actually our Department of Commerce's star ratings, we're able to use their wage data and the demand data to basically make sure, if you're a little math nerd here, a composite score of nothing less than a 6 is basically how you would be able to get to that. So that 6 comes from adding up the star on the left and the star on the right across the top, and then that gets you into that green zone, if you will. Nothing wrong with those foundational credentials, just that we need to be careful with the limited resources that we have, making sure that we're investing in those jobs, or those credentials rather, that'll get you the good job. So with that, just to kind of round us up here a little bit today, kind of where are we headed next with the NC Workforce Credentials Group? So I think the next thing that you're going to see with that is a joint agency release of this list of credentials. So us working with our partners at DPI, Department of Commerce, and the state's attainment goal, nonprofit My Future NC, to really kind of roll this out, and we are exceptionally close to that, so stay tuned a bit. And I talked a little bit about some of those short, medium, and long-term uses, so things like program planning, student advising in the immediate term, but longer term, looking at how can we use this to really drive continuous improvement in our state systems. And so finally, you know, looking at how do we monitor this and go forward. So I think we still have some questions to answer as a work group about how do we use this to, again, keep this alive, keep it living, and making sure that it's reflecting what's going on in North Carolina. One of those critical medium-term uses, though, for that list is a prioritization of which credentials we should really focus on for evaluation of credit for prior learning. And so I think that's one of the really important things of all of this is how this will overlay prioritizing which credential do we look at first, since we already have the data to back up that this list will actually lead to good jobs in North Carolina. So I'm hoping that you guys will find that useful in your various panels, as well as you kind of decide where is your starting point to start evaluating potential opportunities for credit awards. So back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Nate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stop right here for a second before Lisa comes on to talk about the approval process and we get into a little bit more of the weeds. If you have a question for Nate, for Eric, for Dr. Gold, for anybody, go ahead and put it in the chat. I'm looking at that now, or raise your hand and we'll call on you. You can take yourself off mute and ask that question. I want to just hold off for a second. Any questions? I'm looking. Because we're way ahead of time. We're doing good. Not seeing anything. Okay. Think we're good. Wait, Holly Hyde.
Hi. Just hopefully this is a pain-free question, but it did come up in discussion here at our campus at Tri-County. Through our SACS reaccreditation here within the past couple of years, we learned that SACS does not care for any type of credit to be awarded that isn't initially curriculum credit. So has anyone spoken to our accreditation friends and gotten their input before we do all this legwork?
Good question. Dr. Gold, do you want to address that as kind of like what we talked about the other day? Or Lisa?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it, and I think Dr. Gold's probably great to give you more detailed information, but that's a great question to consider SACS, and it might be helpful, Matt, if you share out the document with all the public comments for State Board Code, because we had a ton of SACS questions. So these folks might benefit from seeing some of that feedback that was folded into the State Board Code. So I believe it's important to understand we are establishing a process by which to award credit, right? And so that's important to SACS to make sure we're very clear in what the expectations are for learning outcomes and the alignment of those outcomes, as well as the evidences of learning. So of course, each of you at campuses your campus is responsible for your SACS accreditation, right? The system office doesn't accredit or manage accreditation for the 58. But it's all about how we're documenting the processes. And that's what Matt and Dina have been leading in the procedures guide, which these crosswalks will live in. So it kind of takes all of us to come up with this unified process that we all are going to agree to follow, even transcripting processes. But at the end of the day, it's about the evidences and the documentation that you're going to keep on your campuses. Matt, I'm not sure if that quite answers the question, and if Dr. Gold's available, she can certainly add more to that. And I can put a link to that document from State Board in the chat as Dina presents later.
Okay. I thought that was pretty good. Answer my question, Lisa, so.
Okay. Did I answer, Holly?
Yes, as long as they're only concerned with our doing what we say we're doing, I'm completely on board. I just didn't want us to ignore that they haven't liked our giving credit for anything other than credit in the past.
So good question. And I will say, as you all get other questions, or if you have other things to share throughout this process, I mean, this is new for our system. We want to make sure that we're all comfortable with the credit that we're considering, and as you all are looking at matches from CE to CU courses, we'd be glad to help with any of those discussions as you need.
Okay. Good. Any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat. Yes, we'll send out the PowerPoint. And Lisa's going to maybe put that link.
I will after I do my slides, if that works for you all, because I need to Google real quickly. It looks like Kenny's got his hand up.
Go ahead, Kenny.
Yeah, just one follow-up on that previous question. Am I correct now that SACS does have some written guidance about CE to CU credit and how to handle that process?
So I'm not familiar with any specific guidance for CE to CU credit from SACS. SACS is pretty broad in what their statements are about documentation. Nate, do you have any details on that?
It's a great point, Kenny, and I'll follow it to make sure that we pulled that in. What I can say is that when SACS updated its standards at this most recent revision, it, like many other regional accreditors, changed the language around the awarding of credit to reflect essentially that institutions need to have a documented process, right, and removed the previous language that was there. And so I believe that paired with the conversations that we've had with SACS, and the potential for the documentation that Kenny mentions does speak to the fact that the most recent standards have reduced some of the barriers that were in the play previously. And I think you'll notice that is true with SACS and with most of the regional accreditors at this point. But we'll definitely follow up to get a copy of the documentation that you're mentioning there, Kenny.
Thank you.
Right. Other questions? Okay, so continue to use the chat as we progress. We'll keep looking at it and monitoring it. And next up to talk about the approval process here is Dr. Eads. So Lisa.
Yes, thank you. So as Matt mentioned, we're going to just briefly go over this approval process. It's a little bit in the weeds, but understand that some of our processes that we're putting in place is really to help us see what students are getting credit for. Right now, we don't have, or in the past, we've not had a way to track different types of credit. So for example, high school to community college credit through that articulation agreement, we hope that it's being effective, but we don't have any evidence of that with our data. So we've set up some data collection structures. And again, I want to give a shout out to Dr. Guido for working with our IT team and also with some registrars to help us standardize some coding for transcript processes. So that's already occurred. So that's exciting. Of course, this day is really exciting to bring back together faculty panels. So welcome to those of you that are just joining this process, and good to virtually see the ones of you that were with us a few years ago. So very excited to have you all helping us look at alignment again, because that's critical in terms of SACS, especially thinking about credit and thinking about learning outcomes. It can't happen without faculty input. So having your expertise is critical. And I'm sure our coordinators would also thank you for that. A part of the process also, especially for specific types of credit, I've already mentioned the high school to community college articulation agreement, but also AP, IB, CLEP, I believe we've talked a bit about that with DPI in Cambridge, are some other sources of credit for prior learning where we have asked and will continue to request feedback as we move through these processes to create crosswalks with our Department of Public Instruction partners. So again, that's a critical part, is getting stakeholder buy-in and also feedback. The chief academic officers are part of this process. They're getting updates as we have our calls monthly, and also just a part of helping us think about the crosswalk. So when we get a draft crosswalk, Dina, I believe, is sending that out to our 3 regional leads for the chief academic officers. Eventually, that feedback is going to lead us to a vote letter, and we're going to be moving through that process. When we send a vote letter, colleges have 2 to 3 weeks to respond, and typically we're looking for a 2/3 response from the colleges in favor to move that forward to our curriculum course review committee. That's what, if you don't know, the CCRC, that committee governs curriculum courses currently. So this process now includes our existing committee structure, which has representatives from the chief academic officers as well as 2 college presidents. We meet 3 times a year with that group. They will govern the crosswalks. As you all develop, we go through the vote process and then they approve. They'll also help us maintain those crosswalks. So as you all know, over time, our needs will change. There might be some new credentials that need to be added to the crosswalks, new courses to be considered, or things that need to come out. So that committee is going to be essential. And again, we were looking to collaborate with our existing structure. So, of course, somebody's calling now. And then lastly, the revision is going to include that CCRC process. We already have that same structure and process for our current curriculum course revisions. So any changes to the crosswalk will follow that same process I just briefly described. And I'll be glad to answer any questions about that. But if you don't have any questions, I'm going to toss it to Dina.
Thanks, Lisa. So I'm one of the detail people here, and I've been working with Matt on some of the details and also with the coordinators. And one of the questions that I've been asked several times is, what is the template going to look like? And so I'm just going to go over the template briefly and answer any questions about that. And then we'll talk about the timeline moving forward after this. So in the first column, we're looking for what is the industry certification? Who is that issuing industry or organization? And then how many credit hours and what are the curriculum courses? And in this column and in all of the columns, you may have multiple answers. So if you've got there might be multiple courses that map to a certain industry certification, and you can go ahead and put all of those in that same box and just make the box really big. Under additional requirements, one of the things that we've been talking about, and each panel is going to be a little bit different, and we want you to follow what your industry standards are, but there may be additional requirements, and you can put anything that you want in that box. One of the things that we saw in the 2019 version of these crosswalks were things like not valid over 5 years, 3 years, must be taken in collaboration with. So any additional requirements or comments that you want to put in that box are going to be really important to that particular industry certification and the course credit that would be awarded. And then in the next columns, you'll see where DPI can make comment, and then lastly, the CAO comments, and then this would go out for a vote. So as Dr. Eads stated, we'll send this out to DPI, and the chief academic officers integrate all of their feedback and then send it back out for the vote. So the development of this is really important, and as are the feedback from our partners in terms of getting these crosswalks put together. So and so here's just a sample of what the crosswalks might look like as a live one. So you can see that industry certification, the organization, and in the first example, the credit hours and how there are multiple courses for that, and then the certification within 3 years, which colleges were using that, and then the vote. So are there any questions about the crosswalks or the template or what you'd like to look at? You can certainly work with the coordinator that is overseeing your group and then give Matt and me feedback if there are things that you'd like to change or things that, additional columns that your panel needs to add. And thank you again to everybody for your help. We really couldn't do this without you.
Okay. Holly?
Sorry, I hope I'm not the winner for most questions today.
No, that's all good.
So outside of industry certifications, are we working toward trying to find some sort of crosswalk for life experience?
So the portfolio for life experience, that I talk too loud. They just closed my door. That is one of those that, and I welcome Lisa to respond to this as well, but that is where we're leaving a lot of flexibility up to the colleges. However, we do anticipate there will be some professional development coming down about how to assess a portfolio. It would be nice that everyone kind of at the same level as far as that assessment would go. But Yeah. I mean, it is one of the more challenging forms of prior learning. Dr. Gold, if you're on, or Lisa, you guys want to comment about portfolio for life and work experience?
So I can take a stab at it, and again, if Dr. Gold is available, please chime in. Matt's right. We really need to have some training for portfolio evaluation, and Eric from UNC has suggested some really good potential resources with CALE. So Eric, we just need to follow up on that again, and Dina and I were talking about that earlier today. So we need some standard training on how to evaluate, because it will be time intensive. And faculty will need to follow a standard process, again, thinking about SACs. But beyond that, it's not just life experience, it's the evidences of the learning that will have to be documented. And I can tell you, just with one group of faculty that that is looking at potentially portfolios for credit for experience, we're talking about creating standard rubrics, right, that everyone can agree to, so that we're not just following the same process to evaluate, but that the tools to evaluate are standard. So, and that's a heavy lift. So it's going to take us a bit of time and also some additional training to do that. But that is certainly a component of this work. And there are certainly fields that will lean more to that opportunity than others. So that's all I'm going to say about that at this time. Others may have other comments to make, Dina or Eric or Matt or Dr. Gold.
I would just say to add on to that, and to kind of just add a little more to what Lisa was saying. CALE does have quite a few resources around portfolio development, and they have trainings for portfolio assessments, and there are some membership slots that we have reserved for you all in a kind of a system-wide, statewide membership with CALE that would be, I think it would be really interesting to help to kind of have you dig into that and see what is there, what else you might, what would be, what's helpful that currently exists, what else would be helpful, and if there's something CALE is I mean, you all know, and you, I think most of you, I think, were probably in the trainings that happened last summer, and they are very interested in helping you all and us as a state kind of move forward with this work. And so I think that there are a lot of opportunities that they would be willing to make available. So again, we can figure out a way to, I know there are a few who have been granted access to some of the CALE membership benefits and some of the training and stuff. And so we can maybe think about other ways to expand that to some of you all who might be interested in seeing what's there, and if there are additional professional development opportunities or needs or specific subjects that would be helpful for you, we can kind of dig into that.
Other questions?
To tail on to that, is evidence of learning the main key, or do we also have to come up with some sort of process to equate life experience into credit hours?
That's a great question. And so it's the evidences and the processes, right? Because you're still looking to document the learning outcomes. So it's not about the hours so much as the outcomes. It's not about seat time, though it will be a very thorough process to ensure that every outcome that a student could possibly be expected to demonstrate in the class is documented in that portfolio. So that's a really great question. That's why it's such a heavy lift. It's great if a person's worked 20 years in the field as a journalist, but to give them credit for a class that equates to that, you're really looking at some specific things. So I see Dr. Gold is with us, and so I think she can probably also better answer this than I, but think about it both being evidences and processes, and we're trying really to standardize that across the system wherever we can.
I see Peter's got his hand up, and Joe. So Peter, you want to ask your question first?
Yes, thank you. I'm the chair of the Computer Technologies Department at AB Tech in Asheville. And prior to me coming on in this role a year ago, we have been giving credit for certifications like A+ and Cisco, CWNA, Will I need to, did these go through some similar process? Will I need to put these through that process moving forward, this process?
I don't know if Lisa or Jaime or Dr. Gold want to address that.
I can probably get some more history for myself by talking to the previous chair, how those got put in place, and maybe that's what I need to do. But yeah.
Jaime, if he's available, might want to speak to that since that's his area.
Yes, good afternoon again. Very interesting question. The way I understand this process is we're trying to come up with across the system policy or process, and each college kind of have still have some flexibility on providing credit using their own standards. That's how I understand it, Dr. Lisa.
And that's my understanding as well. Dr. Gold, I'm not sure if you've got audio. I see your video, but her audio's out. So perhaps if Dr. Gold has further comments, she can maybe put them in the chat.
One of the things back in the day when we started this process, we wanted to do is, standardize is kind of a strong word, but we wanted to get away from the situations where colleges may be awarding different credit for the same certifications. And so that's why we're doing this, why we want you to come together and talk about what you've been giving credit, what are the courses, what are the certifications, and align that in it. Debate is great. We want that. We want you to justify what you've been doing and talk with your peers and come up with basically a crosswalk for us. And so anyway, that's the way I think about it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, I apologize. It has been a technology challenge day. So the technology folks came in and switched out my speaker and microphone. So hopefully I'm back on track. I just wanted to comment. I think your Jaime's comment is exactly right, that there's a lot of flexibility for colleges. So if you've been granting credit for those credentials, I think, and that's within your organizational, your institutional policy, that's up to your institution. What we're hoping to do at the system level is create some consistency so that if a student moves from one institution to another, they have that same ability to take that same credential and get the same type of credit for that credential. So I think at the end of this process, we'll probably have some credentials that we all agree to and we all can recognize. And then you may have some credentials that are very specific to employers in your region that you may want to give credit for that maybe don't fit that statewide process or aren't relevant for everybody, that don't make our list, but still you would still have that flexibility as an institution. And so I think going back to SACS is just in the accreditation process, it's important that you have your own policy and that you're following your policies. I know in my conversations with Dr. Whelan and others at SACS, a big part of this is that we're assessing learning outcomes and we're aligning learning outcomes, and that we have a rigorous process for doing that. So being able to demonstrate that we've aligned those learning outcomes and that we've assessed them, and that whatever policies we put in place that we're following and keeping to our policies. So.
Thank you. That helps a lot. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Joe, you had your hand up?
Yes, sir. Some of the folks that mentioned work portfolios or work experience credit, I would like to suggest to them that most of the colleges probably have a procedure for credit by examination. And absent, some industry standard certification or something of that nature, a work experience would probably be best judged at the local institutional level by credit by examination. So I just wanted to point that out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Tracy.
Yes, thank you. Will these panels be looking at all of those various buckets of prior learning, or are we focusing on a specific one?
Yeah, this is the industry recognized certifications work. Yeah, just that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Checking the chat. Okay. Excellent. Dina, you want to talk about the timeline?
Sure. So Dr. Eads put in the chat that the credit for prior learning state board code was passed in February. In spring, the chief academic officers shared their AP and IB crosswalk policies that were already something that was already established. And we at the system office developed a draft of the section 19 of the curriculum procedures reference manual that will basically codify, if you will, what we've been talking about today. In July, Sonia Bartley led registrar training, and again, we have standardized the way that the registrars will be assigning the credit for prior learning so that we can do some data dives to find out where we're most often awarding this credit for prior learning and which of these buckets, like we've been talking about. And then today, of course, is our faculty panel kickoff. And then the hope is that the crosswalks that you're working on will be to Matt and me at the system office by October 29th. If you don't need that much time, then that's great too, and you can get them to us as early as you can. And then those crosswalks will go out for comment. We talked about DPI seeing them, the chief academic officer seeing them, and then they need to go out for vote in early December to the chief academic officers in order for us to get them on the agenda for the February CCRC meeting, and then there with a fall 2022 implementation. So that's what we have for the timeline, and your coordinators will be contacting you for specifics about how your group or your subgroups are going to be operating. And we're really giving all of the credit to you and the coordinators to help get this all done. So that is our last official slide. And we just have questions, just more time for questions. So in the chat or raise your hand, and want to make sure that all of your questions are answered this afternoon before we turn you loose to work on these templates in the crosswalks.
Questions? I hope y'all are not regretting your volunteering, but it looks like, hey, we got somebody. Alyssa?
My question's about high school to college credit. That memo that we have that we award that says that there's a post-assessment testing, but I'm understanding from our person on campus that works with the high schools that most of the high schools don't do that post-assessment anymore. So I'm wondering if the new policies and procedures will override that, or if a new memo is coming. And I see Dr. Reed shaking her head, nodding her head.
Yes, so I'm glad you mentioned that. So it's been several years since we've updated that policy, and during this time from the last policy to what will be the new policy attached to that articulation agreement, DPI has made some changes in their courses to remove post-assessments. They're doing some project-based assessments. There's just a different structure. So Dina, I can't remember if it started last year about this time. We started the process to reevaluate what's on that current list, and we've done some feedback across our internal agency as well as with our chief academic officers. Dean, I don't know if you want to speak to that, just to kind of say where we are with that work, but there is an update coming.
Sure. So we'll be moving forward with getting the coordinators together and talking about all of these, the crosswalks and the certifications, and we really look forward to, I know the coordinators talk about how much they look forward to working with their DPI counterparts, and we're really excited to move that forward and get that memo out to you just as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Yes, and just one post note here, because some of those post assessments are going away or they've gone away, it might be that your local high school to community college agreements become more of what you rely on, right? Because if it's something we can't put on the statewide agreement, that doesn't mean you can't still make it happen locally. So I just want to state that as well. And in the interim, you don't have to wait on us. You can also go ahead and put those on your local agreements now. And when we send the updates, you can update your local agreement.
Okay. I see a question in the chat. Who is over the hospitality panel? And that's Mary. What's Mary's last name? Oliveira? Is that Mary's last name?
Olvera.
Olvera. Yep.
Yeah, and there it is. Thanks, Dina. And also, if there are others who want to volunteer, I would say definitely contact the coordinators in charge of the panel. We're leaving it up to them. That's the really the how many people they want to work with, that type of thing. So sometimes you get too many hands in the cookie jar, it gets kind of unmanageable. Other questions, and I want to thank Eric. I think Eric might have had to jump off, but they've been a great partner.
Matt, we do have another question from Annette in the chat.
Yeah, if the crosswalk differ from what the local school has already passed, will the implementation override our crosswalk? For instance, in IT, there have been some changes due to industry changes, Cisco, of course. In other words, will we have to go through our own approval process? Lisa, you want to talk about that, or Dina?
I was going to see if Dr. Gold wanted to speak to that. I'll be glad to, but if she's available, that would be good. She may not be. So I would say that our intent is for us to come to some consensus on kind of the floor for credit for prior learning, and colleges can certainly be more generous. If there's not consensus with what our state proposal is, or if there's concern about something that we're proposing on a crosswalk, you'll get a chance for feedback. There is a step to make sure we're not making any decisions without your college feedback. So Dr. Gold, do you want to comment or add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what we've talked about. We want to create those crosswalks similar to what we've done with the high school to college articulation agreement, where there's widespread consensus across the system. I know, one of the reasons that the crosswalks will run through the CCRC is it requires a 2/3 vote of all chief academic officers before any action of the CCRC can go into effect. So I think that sets up an approval process that makes sure we get the feedback and we get that consensus. This is a big project. There's so many components to this that what we've talked about is definitely going through, seeing where there's consensus, where there's some easy wins that we can go ahead and agree to, and then we can continue to work on some of those areas where there's a lot more conversation that might be needed, or where there isn't widespread consensus. But I definitely think that's an area, where we can get that consensus, we can go ahead and publish those crosswalks, take them to CCRC.
Annette?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So I think I'm getting the answer here, but I just as a specific one, Cisco changed from 4 courses to 3 courses, being the CCNA. So what my question then would be, when we come together as the panel, what we had all agreed to the time we met in Winston-Salem was that there would be 4 courses. Now there's only 3. So if at the panel comes to the agreement that we don't need the 4, and CRC agrees to that, do we then, will the school be able to adopt that without having to go through our own caps and so forth? Because we won't make that next year's deadline if, based on the timeline that you're talking about, because everything takes so long, ahead of time. So I'm hoping that that's exactly what will happen when we all agree that it only requires 3 courses, that will happen next fall without having to delay it 1 more year. Does that make sense to anybody? Dr. LaHood, can you help with this?
Yes, to answer your question, Annette, we already revised the net 125, 126 to 25 to 26 to reflect the new CCNA, which is Cisco Certified Network Associate course certificate. So that revision already took place and it's going to take effect fall of 2021.
Okay.
And
So
that's
we,
2022. I'm sorry. But to answer your question, that's one of the reasons we're convening again to look at what we've done and update to make sure we're reflecting all the changes, industry certifications and the course revisions that we've done at the system level.
okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see, we got something from Donna. Will the team leader reach out to the volunteers for the next steps? Yes, absolutely. So Frank and Jaime and Tracy and
Lori.
Dina, we're all going to reach out. That's going to happen soon. Right, Dina?
Yeah, some people already have it queued up. They were just waiting for this meeting to see what questions you all had and then be able to address that either right after this meeting or in the next week or so.
We're just disappointed that we can't all come together like we did before in Winston-Salem and spend Bob Whitaker's money and be able to knock it out real quick. But got to stay safe, and I think this will be just as effective, hopefully.
Holly, that's a really great question about having a team for documentation. Are there specific things that you're looking for in terms of that documentation that you would want to see in some kind of a group?
I started to type. It'd probably be easier just to speak. Nothing specifically at this point, but I just did not want to miss out on any documentation that might already be out there and gathered and in.
Yeah, Holly, you cut off, but one of the things that we're challenged with at the system office is our teams won't allow others to access. So we'll talk internally here about creating some type of shared something that our IT people will allow us to use. It could be a Google Drive, but we'll definitely do that, right, Dina? We'll definitely have something.
Yeah, Holly, that's a great idea. You know, I'm putting you on speed dial after this call, right?
Feel free to. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Annette, your hand's still up, but I think you're taken care of, right?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
No worries. All right. And just know this, everybody, that at any time you guys have anything come up, any questions, you need us to talk through anything, Dina and I are available. Our emails are out there somewhere. A lot of you guys have received spam from us, so you know how to get in touch. And we can't say enough how much we appreciate your time. There's a lot going on. There's money coming down from the feds, and industry is screaming for talent, and there's just a lot of stuff going on. But this we do see as extremely important work, and can't thank you enough. Any final comments, Dr. Gold, Lisa, Dina, or questions?
No, I just really appreciate everybody's time and commitment to this work. As you said, I think helping our students complete and making sure they get the credit they deserve is really important, but it does take time and a lot of expertise. And so glad that we have all of you to rely on to help move this work forward.
All right. With that, got about 20 minutes back in your day. Thank you all.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks. Take care.